Thank you, Senator Lyons. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. The one really important ingredient that the Australian Labor Party brings to the subject of employment in this chamber is, of course, embarrassment. Embarrassment at the appalling failure they delivered over 6 years in terms of innovation and employment, and indeed the gall of Labor senators to stand up here and talk about and lecture us on employment. Mr Acting Deputy President, the Australian government recognises that the best way to create jobs is to get the economic fundamentals, the incentives and the profit right and the conditions right that will allow employers to confidently invest in their businesses to create more jobs. That's the sole fundamental ingredient that gets Australia moving, gets Australia drawing in, sucking in more and more people into work. Over 350,000 new jobs have been created in Australia since the Liberal National Party coalition took government in this country. 350,000 new jobs have been created since 2013. More Australians are in work today than ever before. And of course the Labor Party, as I say, is just embarrassed when the facts are put on the table. Employment growth over the last year is higher than every other G7 nation and around 3 times. Let me repeat this so that even Labor senators can understand this. 3 times higher than the rate of Labor's last year in office. Now, again, I just cannot believe the Labor Party coming into this place pretending to look busy on the subject of employment when their record over 6 years in government was just so appalling. We deliver jobs at home and we're providing international leadership. Look no further than how quickly we managed 3 free trade agreements, China, Japan and South Korea. That is one of the fundamental drivers, catalysts to creating more jobs in Australia. We've secured the ambitious G20 target to reduce the gap between male and female labour force participation by 25% by 2025. Where was Labor on this subject? What has Labor done about reducing the participation rate between males and females? Just a black hole of silence, Madam Acting Deputy President. We've designed the employment services system with a $6.8 billion investment in Job Active, the new model that focuses on activation and better meeting the needs of employers. Under Job Active, we've made sure there's a stronger focus on payment for getting people into sustained jobs, recognition that short-term jobs, part-time jobs of 4 weeks can act as a stepping stone to long-term employment and no more training for training's sake. The massive, delightful bureaucracy of having all of these training places, training people in areas that there are no employers investing in is of course a classic folly of what the Labor Party used to do, because it was about jobs for the boys, giving bureaucrats things to do that had no long-term benefit for the national economy. This government has set itself a target to cut $1 billion of red tape each year. We're not only meeting this target, of course, we're exceeding it, and that means that there is more and more capacity in our economy to get on with the job. Now, total employment increased by 58,600 people in October this year, and by 315,000, as I've already said, or 2.7% over the year, to what is a record high. These are figures that the government is very proud of and comes to this place to say, have a look at the facts, have a look at the numbers. They speak for themselves. The unemployment rate has declined by 0.4 percentage points over the year to stand at 5.9% in October of this year, as I've said. The youth unemployment rate declined, a very important indicator. The youth unemployment rate has declined by 1.7 percentage points over the year to stand at 12.2% as at the end of October. Now, as I mentioned, the Labor Party, of course, should and must be extremely embarrassed. Extremely embarrassed. And indeed, the previous Speaker, Senator Lyons, wanted to touch on shipbuilding. Well, in government for 6 years, there was not one ship completed whilst they were in power. But what's worse, there was not one single ship planned. There was not one single budget line item that invested in shipbuilding in Australia other than the project that was commenced under the Howard government in South Australia, the Air Warfare Destroyer program. So standing up and talking about shipbuilding here, I mean, seriously, the blush on senators' faces from the Labor Party is very, very visible from this side of the chamber. They did absolutely nothing. They didn't even pick up a pen and have a plan. And plans don't cost very much, but they didn't even do that. I mean, seriously, to come in here and talk about shipbuilding, I have never seen people with such gall in all my life. And it's not difficult to work out the Royal Australian Navy desperately needed ships, both surface combatants and replenishment ships, but the Labor Party didn't even plan them, wouldn't even talk about them. And now they're saying, oh, shipbuilding jobs, you're doing the wrong thing by shipbuilders. For 6 years you did nothing, and you're as guilty as sin about your dilatory conduct, and anybody who loses a job in the shipbuilding industry in Australia has no one to blame but the Australian Labor Party. They're the ones who have effectively turned the tap off on investing in Australian shipbuilding. And as the Secretary for Defence said, if you wanted to avoid the valley of death in terms of shipbuilding, you had to do something more than 4 years ago. And we all know what happened in defence more than 4 years ago. They took $16 billion out of the defence budget. You know, the gall of coming in here talking about shipbuilding jobs lost. Under the watch of the former government, particularly the former Minister, Senator Carr, employment in manufacturing in Australia fell by 127,600 people. So 127,000 families, if you like, were put on the dole or out of work. Or as a percentage, 12.1% of those employed in the manufacturing industry in Australia. What a fabulous record that is. And yet Senator Carr is here raising this motion on employment. I mean, seriously, you'd have to laugh if it just wasn't so disgracefully sad and tragic that the Labor Party have put, when they were in power, 127,600 manufacturing workers out of a job. What a fantastic record. You know, it's just tragic that they can be so laden with gall and so embarrassing when it comes to talking about a subject about employment. 127,600 people out of a job under Senator Carr's watch, the largest fall of any of the 19 broad industries in our country. You know, the Labor Party, they seriously are like some sort of toxicity for employment in industries that they pride themselves in having union and employment membership in. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics Labour Force survey from November 2007 to August 13, this is the figures that they have produced. Over the same period, total employment grew by 496,200, or by 8.8%. So that in manufacturing, when Labor was in power, other industries were expanding, but in manufacturing, 127,600 people lost their job. So the whole of the economy is doing reasonably well, but in manufacturing we're going backwards, and Senator Carr, of course, was the minister responsible for that. Employment fell in 13 of the 16 manufacturing sectors. I mean, you know, thankfully after 6 years we got rid of Labor, because there'd be absolutely nothing left if they were still there today. The sector had the largest employment. Was transport equipment manufacturing, in which employment fell by 25,000, or by 24%. The transport equipment manufacturing sector includes motor vehicles, and we all know Senator Carr's magic touch with Mitsubishi. They were the first of the motor vehicle manufacturers to leave our shores, and of course it was on his watch. The transport manufacturing sector includes, as I say, motor vehicle and motor vehicle part manufacturing, in which employment fell by 17,000 people, or 27.6%. Again, what an unbelievably shocking and disgraceful record for a minister and for a party that wants to be the alternative government. These falls dwarf the employment growth in the few manufacturing sectors that did grow. Can I say that the Labor Party clearly offers, on the facts that I've put on the table, Madam Acting Deputy President, nothing more or less than cynical, quite deceitful, misrepresentative crocodile tears to the Australian public in raising the subject of employment when they themselves were just so contributive to the decline in manufacturing. They had no policy, they had no plan, and as I say, 127,600 people, or 127,600 households, lost their job in the manufacturing sector over the 6 years that Labor Party was in power. That is just an absolute disgrace, and may I say, underlines the level of gall, the level of fraud that the ALP brings to this place in arguing about employment. That's to be contrasted with the fact that employment increased, as I've said, and let's reiterate these, 58,600 new jobs in October 2015. Last month, 58,000 new jobs, 315,000 jobs over the year, an improvement in employment by 2.7% to a record high. To a record high. That's what the government is doing for employment in this country. The unemployment rate, as bad as it is and was when we took over, has declined by 0.4 of a percentage point to 5.9. Youth unemployment, as I say, has declined by 1.7 percentage points to 12.2. So they're headed in the right direction, and we've inherited an economy that was moribund, that was suffocating in red tape, that was suffering from the complete disinterest of the Labor Party in creating any confidence for investment. So 350,000 new jobs created since we've come into office. That is a fabulous factual achievement by this government and stands in absolute stark contrast to what the Labor Party were able to achieve over 6 years. But of course they'll never acknowledge, and the question that every time a person from the ALP gets up and wants to talk about employment and wants to talk about shipbuilding, for instance, the question must be asked, which ships did you invest in, did you plan to build for the Royal Australian Navy over the 6 years that you were in power? Not only did they not plan anything, they allowed some contractors to go, and there are about 4 ships being built offshore today for fleet management services that are for the Royal Australian Navy on subcontract that could have been built in Australia that weren't, and the Labor Party sat on their hands and let those contractors go to Damen in the Netherlands and build them in the Philippines. The hypocrisy that is alive in this place when the Labor Party wants to talk about employment in shipbuilding is outrageous. Outrageous. They did not have a plan for Australian shipbuilding. The shipbuilding unions, as I said to them on several occasions over the 6 years, you've got to talk to the government to get them to plan some ships for the Australian shipbuilding industry, because when the blocks for the air warfare destroyers are finished, a lot of people are going to be out of a job. They went to the government, and the government of the day, the Labor Party, listened to their union mates and then did absolutely nothing. So we're going to see 500 more jobs go after Christmas in South Australia. BAE down at Williamtown is putting people off. Forjacks have already put a lot of people off. And this is because the decisions required to build ships in Australia had to be made back in 2012, 2011, 2010. The Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government did nothing. Successive ministers for industry simply ignored the problem, hoping it would go away. And today the Labor Party comes into this place and wants to talk about employment, and senator after senator I know is going to get up and say, what about the shipbuilders? As if you can start building a ship tomorrow. The planning process goes on for years. The budget has to be, the line items have to be put into the budget, and you have to choose designs, you have to run a contest, a tender program, you have to do all this sort of stuff. And everybody knew that halfway through the completion of air warfare destroyers there'd start to be a decline in employment. And what did the Labor Party do? Nothing. Nothing. And yet they stand up here today to talk about employment and then raise shipbuilding. Well, can I just say they have absolutely no idea not only how to run an economy, but how to be involved in supporting and assisting any industry whatsoever. Anybody who loses a job today in shipbuilding has no one to blame but the Australian Labor Party, who sat on their hands for 6 years and didn't even put a pen to paper to make a plan to build more ships. They didn't even do that. When we took over, the planning for shipbuilding was just a blank sheet of paper. A blank sheet of paper. You know, new ships, the box marked new ships for the Royal Australian Navy, you took the lid off and there was a cobweb in one corner. Nothing had been done. So when a Labor senator gets up in this place and talks about industry, employment and what's happening in employment, just remember that they did nothing for 6 years. And we've created 315,000 new jobs since taking over. The gall, the embarrassment, the hypocrisy of Labor wanting to talk about employment, it just really is tragically sad that they pretend to speak up for people in their employment and in their jobs when all the while, when they had the chance, when they had the chequebook, they did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President.
Thank you.